In Chapter 5, we met JT and his brother Red. The chapter ended with Liz being disappointed, realizing that JT is just using her to get his math homework done. Chapter 6, we see a little bit more of Liz and her character. I spent all of homeroom frantically doing my math homework. Again. When I was done, Liz leaned over and whispered, "What are you going to do for your history report?" For a minute, I didn't know what she was talking about. Then I remembered the project Miss Taylor had told us about yesterday, the one that involved an oral presentation. No wonder I'd done my best to block it out. Liz kept talking, because I had this really good idea and I wanted to ask you to work with me. I glanced at Sally. Liz saw who I was looking at and her face dropped. But she pasted a smile back on so fast, if I'd blinked, I'd have missed her true reaction. "Of course," she said brightly. "That makes sense, you and Sally being old friends and all." I suddenly knew she'd imagined this scene, just like I had pictured the one with JT, and this wasn't the way hers had ended either. I felt bad, but not bad enough to actually work with her. Liz turned away, but as she did, she knocked her math notebook to the floor. I bent over to pick it up. On the back was a square with lots of little squares in it. In some of the squares were numbers. I knew what it was. It was a magic square. Magic squares have been around for just about forever. According to David's old math book, he used to let me read it when he wasn't studying, the Chinese discovered them way back before Jesus was even born. The simplest was a 3x3 square with the numbers 1 to 9 arranged so that every row, column, and diagonal added up to 15. Liz had a 4x4 square on her notebook with some of the numbers missing. I ran my fingers over the numbers. The top row added up to 34. "It's a magic square," said Liz, sounding a little embarrassed. "It's a silly game my mother taught me." 13, I said, pointing to a black square. "Oh," said Liz, "thanks. I couldn't figure that one out." I stared at the square again. Yep, each row, column, and diagonal added up to 34. It was beautiful. I handed back the notebook and counted 2, 3, 5, 7. "What was your idea?" "Well, I have this book about the founding of the Little Rock and the Indians who used to live here." And Liz paused and looked at me. Then she shook her head. "It's okay, Marley. You don't have to pretend to be interested." "It's just," I took a deep breath. "Why me?" Liz shrugged. "You seem like a hard worker. At my old school, I was the one who always ended up doing all the work. I knew what that was like. I'd worked with Sally on every project since 3rd grade. Maybe it was time for a change." "Okay," I said. "Really?" she asked. My inner voice is thinking that I'm surprised that Marley is working with a new partner since she's so comfortable with Sally, even though Sally isn't a very good friend to her. I nodded. "Great," she said. "Meet you at the public library tomorrow after school?" I nodded again. The bell rang and homeroom was over. Liz gave me a little wave and walked off. What was she? A root beer? An extra thick milkshake with 2 straws? Carrot juice? I didn't know, and I didn't really care. I just wanted to know everything she knew about magic squares. My inner voice is thinking about the things that Marley and Liz have in common. Can you think of 2 things that they have in common? On Friday, I arrived early and waited by the picnic table, and again JT arrived just before the bell rang. He winked at me as he took my homework. Like your hair. Judy and I stayed up late the night before putting my hair into curlers. I knew I should feel mad about the homework, but I couldn't help being just a little tickled he had noticed. And at least this time I'd known to do the homework twice. When I walked in the library that afternoon, there was Liz, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, reading glasses balanced on her nose. When she saw me, she pulled off the glasses and waved. "Hi, Marley," she said with a smile. "I wasn't sure you'd come." I shrugged. Clearly, she didn't understand how much I liked math. When she realized I wasn't going to answer her, she handed me a book, and I sat down and started reading. We read for a long time. The book she had pulled for me on the Quapaw Indians was actually pretty interesting. The Quapaws were the Indians who had lived in Little Rock when the first settlers came. The book talked all about their families and how they got married and what they did when they died. When I looked up, Liz had 2 pages of notes on a crisp, neat handwriting. "Find anything interesting?" she asked. I nodded. "What?" I passed her a book and pointed to a paragraph about what they did with orphaned children. She read it quickly. "Cool. Hey, we could do this for the class. Put on sort of a pretend ceremony. Pick some kids to be the orphans and some others to be the fathers." That would be interesting, and more fun than just reading a boring old paper aloud. "Only one problem," she said. I looked at her. "You have to talk," she said. "I mean, for the presentation." I shook my head. I did not talk in front of the class. That was like asking me to walk down the street in my underwear. "You have to at least say something." I just looked at her. "If I do all the talking, people will think I did all the work, and that's not fair." She was right. It wasn't fair, and I didn't care. I did not give oral presentations. "It's important to face your fears," said Liz. "It makes you a better person." My inner voice is saying, wow, that sounds like a theme. I thought I was pretty good just the way I was. We stared at each other for a long moment. If it was a staring contest she wanted, I knew I'd win. Sure enough, she looked away first. "I tell you what," she said. "My mother has a whole book about magic squares. You speak during our presentation, and I'll give it to you." Just when I thought I'd gotten the best of her, she went and turned it all around. A book of magic squares? There was no way I could resist that. And from the smug look on her face, I was pretty sure she understood how much I liked math after all. "Fine," I said. Liz smiled at me. The front door of the library opened, and a couple of colored girls walked in. Liz stiffened. I knew Negroes were allowed to use this library now. That rule had passed a few years ago, but I didn't see them there much. It was like the bus. Officially, anyone could sit anywhere they wanted to now, but most of the time, the colored folks stayed to the back. "I think we've done enough for one day," said Liz, closing her book. She glanced over at the colored girls again. They were waiting, trying unsuccessfully to get the librarian's attention. I wondered if Liz was like some of the other kids at school, calling colored folks names I wasn't allowed to say. I wondered if I could do this project with her if she was. "They aren't hurting anyone," I said quietly. "I know," she said. "I'm just tired of studying." But I didn't quite believe her. See if you can find a couple of examples on this page showing how Liz might feel about people of other races and integration. Is the author giving us examples of foreshadowing? Question mark.